Welcome to my photographic walking tour of Fitzrovia. My name is Adam Samuel. I lived in Fitzrovia for 8 years. I still work in the area. But the first problem we have with any walking tour of this neighborhood is to set its limits. And that's not entirely straightforward because Fitzrovia has never been a governmental unit as such. If we look at a map here, we can see the easy borders to draw: Oxford Street to the south, and the A501, the Melbourne Road, which becomes the Euston Road, to the north. It's the west and east that cause the problem. To the east, some people say it should be Gower Street, others the more natural geographic border, which is Tottenham Court Road. I prefer the Tottenham Court Road answer. It's simply neater, and the area in between isn't terribly distinguished. To the west, many people argue that the border of Great Portland Street, which is the B506, this doesn't make an awful lot of sense of the roads that cross it and end up coming into either Portland Place, like Howland Street, which becomes New Cavendish Street, and lower down Mortimer Street, which goes across Great Portland Street into Regent Street. I prefer to put the border in Portland Place. To the west is clearly Marylebone. That's easy enough. And to create a corridor between Great Portland Street and Portland Place is also part of Marylebone. Doesn't make a great deal of sense. Let's begin then at the top of Portland Place with this sculpture that nobody seems to notice at the top of the road of Edward, Duke of Kent, best known really as the father of Queen Victoria. Further down the road, we have Joseph Lister, the father of modern surgery, largely because of his insistence on using clean equipment and antiseptic stuff generally. I like the rather eccentric street lamp right in front of him. And then we have General Sikorsky staring at us and staring down Portland Place. He came to Britain with the Polish Air Force. He was essentially the leader of the Poles in London at the start of World War II. He died in a plane crash in 1943. And then we see an example of the Adam family in action. We see them around in Fitzrovia quite a lot. This building dates from the 1780s or thereabouts. Can you see the Palladial style from the triangle on the roof? Unfortunately, somebody's been allowed to build over the back of it, thereby wrecking the vista to some degree. The Renaissance took a long time to come to Britain. Architects doing the grand tour picked up the ideas, and we first see it really towards the end of the 17th century, this Palladial style. This building by James Adam, across the road a bit further south, shows the same Palladial style, and I've always liked it because it looks as though somebody's chopped the edge off the building. And I don't know whether that was because of a bomb or what, but it looks strangely lopsided as a result. But overlooking everything is the magnificent Post Office Tower, as I still insist on calling it. When Mrs. Thatcher privatized British Telecom, she essentially sold off the building with it. And before that, it had been part of the post office, who owned the telecom system as well. I remember as a child going up to the top of it. There was a revolving restaurant, which I think still exists and which can be used for private entertainment. Sadly, an IRA bomb put a stop to public visits to the building, and they've never been restarted, which is a great shame. The building monopolizes the landscape of the area and acts as quite a useful navigational aid. At the bottom of Portland Place is the controversial Langham Hotel. I say controversial because although it appears very grand, it's had a rather less than grand past. Built in about 1860, it's always struggled financially, or it did until at least very recently. In the Wall Street crash, the then owners hoped very much that the BBC would take it off their hands. Unfortunately, the BBC was busy building Broadcasting House almost next door, which opened in 1932, and they weren't very interested in the building. It was taken over by the military at the start of World War II, and the BBC used it extensively in the Second World War, typically to broadcast off the roof. It was eventually owned by the BBC from 1965 until the late 1980s, used for a library, used for a variety of other purposes. And it was only in the 1990s that it was then sold back into the hotel world. It was the subject of 2 refurbishments. If you've ever been inside, and I have, you'll know that the coffee shop at the entrance, or near the entrance, has been refurbed, but in the wrong architectural style by somebody that went to architecture school a bit too seriously, and has remodeled it in almost in an Art Deco modernist style, which isn't really in keeping with the rest of the building. Nevertheless, it's where the England cricket team stay when they play at Lord's, and it's where Lady Gaga greets her followers with great enthusiasm. Around this corner, you'll find a number of buildings which actually belong to the BBC. They're big landowners. They used a number of these buildings as radio studios. In the days before television came over, they also could televise you. You went in there to do an interview, you were given a screen, and you broadcast into the screen and magically turned up on television a couple of hours later. This is Broadcasting House, and the most controversial sculpture of all by Eric Gill. It's a horrible sculpture. It should come down. Somebody was arrested recently for trying to vandalize it. I don't blame them. I shouldn't encourage law breaking, but you know what I mean. Eric Gill was a truly appalling man. I'll leave it to you to find out why I think that, and the statue is particularly inappropriate in the light of that. But it is all just ugly, which I suppose is a reason to pull down anything. This is what happens when you come around the corner from Broadcasting House. So Broadcasting House is the building on the left, traditionally the head office of BBC Domestic Radio. In a building project that seemed to take an eternity, the BBC brought most of television to this glass building at the end of this sort of square, or piazza, if you like, and sent some of it off to Salford in Manchester, much to the annoyance of any broadcaster who was sent there, because this is a fantastic neighborhood, as we'll see. Anyway, the glass building at the end opened in 2013. It includes also large chunks of the old BBC radio empire. And as we come out of the square by walking towards the front door and then turning right, you'll see a statue of George Orwell in the dark. That lighting is exactly how it's supposed to look. And this is the intended preface of one of his finest books, never actually appeared. But now, as we come out into the light, this is the Langham Court Hotel. Originally, the senior nurses' accommodation for the nearby Middlesex Hospital was pulled down in the late noughties. The problem with this building is it was also secretly the abortion clinic. Its architectural style doesn't fit any natural category. I think of it as something might have been inspired by Istanbul or something in the Near East anyway. If you turn left up Hanson Street, you'll find a building on the right with this rather fun mural painted onto the slightly cracked tiles. This is the old kosher butchers in Hanson Street. I just like the idea of the cow staring at you through the bars, which are actually street bars. If we come back onto Langham Street, as it becomes Foley Street, we see a Georgian building with a blue plaque for Henri Fuseli, a famous Swiss artist. If you want to see his work, go to Basel, there's plenty of it there. He was a key player, though, in the creation of the Royal Academy. And he lived in this house for really quite a long time. I cut the bottom off the photograph deliberately because underneath it is a rather undistinguished pizza chain. As we turn around the corner into Candover Street, a street I lived in for 8 years, you find 2 buildings that are quite fun from the arts and crafts period, typically from about 1890 to the late 1920s. Belmont House, rumour has it, is where H.G. Wells accommodated his mistress. The right-hand building, I think, is more classically arts and craftsy, sort of following in the style first created by William Morris. If we turn around that corner, see Candover Street on the left and Ridinghouse Street on the right, you'll see an old factory building. Don't be misled by the date of 1808. It's much older than that. The factory is much older than the building. The building is actually from the late 19th century. It's a fairly early example of arts and crafts. If we now come back onto Foley Street, we reverse slightly, we find ourselves looking up Ogle Street shortly afterwards, and we find this Catholic church. It's a fine building in its own right, but I just like the way it's built into the side of the vicarage, which I think predates it. At the end of Foley Street, we find the King and Queen pub, famous for being where Bob Dylan played his first gig in London. It still has a music room directly above the pub, where I went to one of the best 60th birthday parties I've ever been to, hosted by a professional musician who with his friends turned it into a massive 4-hour jam session. Originally, the Workers' Library was upstairs in the pub. It's long gone. We'd love to get it back. Literally round the corner is the old workhouse, now being prettified for expensive housing, much to many locals' regret, because originally it was indeed a very bleak building. Its significance lies in the fact that Charles Dickens almost certainly was living in the same street when he was writing Oliver Twist, and therefore imagined Oliver asking for more. This is the blue plaque to prove it. This is further down south on Cleveland Street. But if we walk up Cleveland Street in a straight line, we leave what I call Middle Fitzrovia and enter Upper Fitzrovia, typified by the magnificent Fitzroy Square. This is the main part of it, designed by the Adam brothers. The plaque you can vaguely see at the bottom of the street lamp actually refers to Robert Adam, but the word on the street is that it's actually a combined family business effort. And it's built in much this style most of the way, although some bits have been knocked down and modernized in less than attractive ways. One thing I do like about Fitzroy Square is this double plaque. I like the idea that George Bernard Shaw and Virginia Woolf lived in the same building, but you will notice they didn't do so at the same time, which could have been have had explosive consequences for world literature. As we come out of Fitzroy Square and go south again, we encounter the Montague Centre and this metal plaque. WCLS stands for the West Central Liberal Synagogue, and the Montague Centre is in fact their administrative offices of the whole liberal Jewish movement. Lily Montague was a lay preacher, as she described herself, at the St. John's Wood Liberal Synagogue, magnificent building facing the main entrance to Lord's Cricket Ground in St. John's Wood. And she ran various girls' clubs in the area. So it's appropriate that this is named after her. Her brother Ewan Montague came up with the idea of Operation Mincemeat, of putting a tramp's body with a briefcase off the Spanish coast to persuade, and it did so successfully, the Germans to think that the British and Americans were going to invade Greece, when in fact they were about to attack Italy. What's interesting about this plaque, of why I'm showing it to you, is the 3 p.m. Saturday bit. This was clearly put in to help people who worked either in the rag trade or perhaps in Berwick Street Market in Soho, and who wished to attend synagogue, but could not do so on Saturday morning because they had to go to work. The 3 p.m. on a Saturday was a period traditionally always given off, and therefore a time when people could attend synagogue. The area of Fitzrovia during the interwar era was quite Jewish, and Soho was more so. Less so now, notwithstanding the 2 synagogues that there are in the neighborhood. If we walk now down Whitfield Street, we will eventually go past the American Church, turn left, and find ourselves on Tottenham Court Road, looking at this magnificent mural. This was put together in the 1960s, 70s, I think, actually, or could even be 80s. The mural depicts real people, and that's its significance. In it, you'll see the figure of Horace Cutler with the beard, depicted as the devil hanging off the top. Why was he depicted in this way? Well, he was the leader of the Greater London Council, the ancestor of the GLA, and his plans were to flatten the area. My father and I bond over this because I grew up in Pinner, where he was the local representative on the GLC. But all these other characters are real people with children who are typically around these days. Just around the corner from the mural, you'll find this rather charming little museum, Pollock's Toy Museum. You'll see the Pollock's Theatres on the second level of the window that we certainly played with as children. You got these cardboard cutouts and you had to turn them into active plays. If we carry on along Whitfield Street and cross Good Street, we will end up at Crabtree Fields. That's behind this photograph. It's not a terrifically distinguished park, which was created in the 80s out of an old bomb site. But this little place or street is called Colville Place. It dates from about 1810. It is really rather lovely, and it takes you from Whitfield Street into Charlotte Street, the most fashionable road in Fitzrovia. The Charlotte Street Hotel typifies this. A lot of celebrities do newspaper interviews here because they can do so in a library with no windows and order nice posh tea and not have people hassling their superstars with camera lenses and the like. I've taken this picture from right in front of the Fitzroy Tavern, which is where Augustus John and Dylan Thomas fell out in the 1930s, and where the name Fitzrovia may in fact have been thought up. But there is a little alleyway just by the hotel that will take you to the Newman Arms. And I need to show you a little bit of the sordid side of the neighborhood. The alleyway on the left of the Newman Arms takes you into the local brothels of past times, no longer any such thing, and takes you neatly into Newman Street. If this is the top end of Middle Fitzrovia, Charlotte Street represents that, we are now going to head towards Lower Fitzrovia. Perhaps the least attractive part of the neighborhood, but it does have a couple of masterpieces that I'm going to show you. If you come onto Newman Street, go down a little bit, turn right on East Castle Street, the road that's parallel to Oxford Street, and then take a short right into Wells Street, you'll find this little alleyway, or small road actually, off to your left. I just think it's an interesting side of industrial Fitzrovia that's always been present. We saw it earlier with the Arts and Crafts Factory in Candover Street and Ridinghouse Street. But this is really a way to walk elegantly to the masterpiece of the neighborhood in Margaret Street. The Margaret Street Church was built in 1859, and the architect, William Butterfield, is also the architect of Keble College, Oxford. This is in Gothic revival style, but you'll notice it's multicolored, unlike that of Barry, who redesigned the Houses of Parliament after the Great Fire of the 1830s. Butterfield was later wildly criticised, and correctly so, for the appalling Keble College, Oxford, the Gothic monstrosity as it's still widely called, because of the effect of using multicolours on a huge platform. Here it's done beautifully to scale, which makes this church an absolute joy. It's part of the Oxford movement, or at least those were the people that had it built, including William Gladstone. There was originally a chapel on this site, but it was replaced by this magnificent example of Catholicism without the Pope. Very ornate, but very, very exciting as a piece of architecture, largely because the scale is right. But you really do have to go inside to enjoy it. This photograph barely represents it. And this takes us to our last stop on our walk. If we go down Margaret Street a little bit and turn left again, we'll end up back on East Castle Street to a quite charming little Welsh chapel, Welsh Baptist chapel from 1889. Very classically Victorian, lovely and ornate and elegant. Inside, relatively uninteresting, enjoy it from the outside. And that will take us to the end of our tour, because if we walk along East Castle Street to the end, we're going westwards, we'll end up at Oxford Circus Tube Station. We'll be one stop away from where we started at Regent's Park. Thank you.